I call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of the Northfield Public School Board. Today is Monday, January 23rd, 2023, and the time is 6 p.m. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded. The recording of this meeting will be posted on the district website as soon as possible. Welcome members of the community here tonight to observe the important work being done on behalf of all school district stakeholders. Dr. Hellman, we have some items in the table file.
Yes, we have several items in the table file this evening. The first is they're mostly in the consent agenda. We have a generous gift agreement with Merchants Bank of Northfield for angel funds for student lunches. We have several personnel items, including appointments, increase, decrease, change in assignment, and a leave of absence. And we're also adding the paraprofessional recognition week to the items for information. That's the table file.
Okay, thank you very much. If there are no objections, we will add these items to the agenda as we move forward. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Jeff. Need a second. Second by Corey. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Do we have any public comment? Okay, so we're gonna move on past item 3, which is our public comment portion. And we're on to announcements and recognitions. Would you like to start?
I don't have any tonight, but I know you do.
Okay, I did email out to the board members, our email going out to over 50 community members, inviting them to our legislative action committee. These were individuals who either served before or served in some capacity with the district budget prioritization or high school task force, some other way that they were involved. And so we're excited to have anybody join us. Our first meeting will be this Saturday by Zoom at 9 a.m. So you can get in touch with either Matt, myself, or Ben, and we will get your community members connected. Any other comments or announcements from the board members? Okay. We are now on to items for discussion and reports, and we have a financial forecast. Welcome, Val.
Good evening. I am going to walk through the financial forecast and our budget plan for fiscal 24, if you can believe that already. So some of the topics we'll discuss tonight are the typical financial cycle that we go through, the known parameters that go into this forecast, our current enrollment projection, some of the financial assumptions that we're making, and then what that budget parameter will look like. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be 23, 24 now that I'm looking at it. Always the night of, and then the budget presentation timeline. So most of you have seen this before, but this is the typical financial cycle that we have adopted as a district. And I think it works really well to keep financial information in front of you regularly throughout the year. So we are in January and doing the financial projection, but it is a nice little circle. So this will feed our adopted budget, and that will happen anywhere February through June, depending on budgets and timelines. The capital budget and LTFM budget will come in February. Some of the others are a little later when we have a little bit more information about what is to come. Then in the fall, we will do our audit. We have a June 30 year end. We do the audit and we get our enrollment and all of those things happening. And then that feeds into our revised budget. Once we have staffing complete, audit, the levy, and then we do that revised budget in December typically, which then updates a financial projection. So this cycle has worked really well. I'm in my 12th year with the district, and I'm a big fan of it. So hopefully you are too. So here's what we know. We have a strategic commitment to stewardship. So we responsibly manage our personnel, finances, property, time, and environmental impact. And I hope that you know that as we go through this, those are things that we are looking at with every decision that we're making as a district. We ended the 21-22 school year with 14.19% unassigned fund balance, which, as you're aware, and I'm super aware, is just above the new board goal of 14%. And that was presented by the auditors in December. The 22-23 revised budget does plan for a $1.8 million deficit. And we are still experiencing declining enrollment. You've heard me say this several times, but about 80% of our budget is salary and benefits. And the health insurance increase to the district's health insurance contribution is another contributing factor. And we do know that, so that is a known parameter at this time. And enrollment drives just about 70% of our total revenue formulas. And the budget priorities are from last year's process are in place and looked at in this process as well. So as a reminder, because it's been a little bit since we've reviewed this and we have some new board members, I just wanted to bring those budget priorities back. I won't go through all of them because that's a lot of reading, but as a reminder, elementary was very focused on class size. So K3 goal of 20 or less and grades 4 and 5 with class sizes of 23 to 25. High quality early childhood, access to the specials that we currently have in addition to their core curriculum. Secondary really focused on mental health for students, keeping kids in the district through creative scheduling. And again, a look at core class size to make sure that we have the right balance for students on a variety of electives. District services it was a little harder to kind of rein in into one area because it is a wide range of things that we provide for the district. So funding strategies to help reduce students needing special ed services was a big one. Just how can we control that spending that's required? Use of technology, e-learning to promote learner outcomes. That each building has the bilingual people and systems that allow for Spanish-speaking families to connect with their child's school, hiring diverse staff. So they are ranked in order of how they were voted on in the groups. So top to bottom, that is how they were ranked. Elementary and secondary, I chose the top 7 just because there was a lot of words on the slide, but definitely hitting the high priorities there. So this is our currently updated enrollment projection. So the 2022-23 numbers are what I am projecting right now that we will end the year with. And then 23-24 and 24-25 are the projected. So that's why they all have the little hashtag on there. But you can see 18-19, we had a total of about 4,050 students. That was the peak of our enrollment, and we have declined every year since then. I am projecting for 23-24 that we'll see a really slight increase in enrollment, but basically stable enrollment for next year and then continuing to decline after that. And I did have a request to put in a couple graphs. So these weren't in your original board packet, but this is just another couple of ways to look at that enrollment projection. This particular one shows you by grade grouping. So kindergarten, grades 1 through 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12. So you can kind of see if you follow the colors through the years, which ones are maybe declining or slightly increasing. We have seen for the last couple of years a pretty significant decline in elementary and a increase in secondary. And the projection is now showing that to shift the other way. So the elementary ones that we've seen decreasing are now shifting to secondary. So we're projecting lower numbers in the secondary and projecting a slight increase in our elementary numbers for the next couple of years. And this one just shows it in total. The dark purple is actual data that's been submitted. And then 22-23 is kind of the lined year. And then the light purple is all of the projected. The black line is really kind of a smoothing trend to show kind of balancing out those ups and downs, but you can still see it's on its way down, certainly not dramatically, which is great for us that we can be planful and mindful in our budget choices, but still declining, which presents a funding challenge for the district. So here are some of the assumptions that are in this model. The fund balance goal of 14% is obviously the base assumption that we are rolling off of. For revenue, we are assuming a 2% increase from the state on the per pupil basic funding each year. This is a little higher than we probably would typically. I would say we're in the 1% range typically. Obviously, with $17 billion, we hope that it's more than 1%. And we have had a 2% increase pretty regularly for the last 4 years, probably. And so we're planning that moving forward. Still declining enrollment. The enrollment projection feeds into the model. The referendum has the inflationary increase. I believe that's budgeted at like a 2% average inflationary increase. Obviously, this last levy cycle, we know that saw a pretty big jump from the state's calculation. And so that could be the case in the future, but we don't know that for sure. So I will conservatively estimate 2% because that is historically a range they have been in. We know that the capital projects levy increase will be revenue for fiscal 25. And excuse me, I'm estimating a 2% increase in the special ed funding each year. That is a little less than prior years. And there was a change in the statute language. The statute language had 4%, and they have been, last year, they changed that to be declining. So it's going to be 3% and then 2%. I don't know the exact time frame. I think it's over 2 years. Sorry. But planning for that lesser increase in the future. It is still reimbursement based. So it should, in theory, still be roughly 55% of our total expenditures. But the 2% increase is part of one of the 3 calculations that they go through for calculating our special ed revenue. And then federal funding, I have holding flat. So after all of our pandemic funds are spent by the end of fiscal 24, we will revert back to the normal federal ones, title, special ed, that we've seen in the past. And historically, we've not seen an increase in those. And so that's what we are planning in this model. On the expenditure side, obviously, salary and benefits are the largest portion of the forecast. The average across all of our 16 employment groups is about 3%. And that includes base increases, longevity, kind of everything in between. And then a 3 to 5% increase in non-salary. Typically, I would say it's a 2 to 3%, but with the inflation that we've seen, I did include higher percentages for non-salary in the first couple of years, with that tapering down, hopefully kind of returning back to what we've seen historically. And then a 3% increase for transportation, which is a fairly large portion of our non-salary budget. So this is what it looks like when you pull it together. I have 2 different slides here that kind of break down. It's a lot of numbers to look at, so I will try to succinctly walk through the important ones. Anything highlighted in yellow is kind of the numbers I wanted to jump out. But you can see on the top, we've got 14%. That is across each of the years. The pupil unit value is what we are expecting from the state per weighted pupil. And then that 2% is just showing that I had a 2% increase in the state funding each year. The 1% increase on basic formula gives you an estimate of, if the state increased it 1% based on the enrollment in the model, that's how much additional revenue we would receive. And then you can see the breakout by property taxes, state, federal, and local, which is the typical breakout I've shared with you for revenue. And you can see we're at right now projecting about 59, just shy of 59.8 million. And then next year's projected at about 59.8. Again, that's partially that referendum increase that we saw in the levy certification process in December that I presented. And so you'll see a pretty good jump in that property tax number right there. And then a slight increase in the state. Again, that's pretty much driven off the special ed and the basic per pupil formula, even though we're showing the slight increase in enrollment. So those things play together in that number. Federal, you will see drops way down. We will spend the vast majority of our pandemic funds this year in fiscal 23, but there is a little bit that will be remaining for fiscal 24. And then the other local funds, this has been pretty difficult to project, if I'm being honest, just because of the pandemic and the things that this impacted with participation and seeing things come back or not come back. And so that I have holding flat, which is a fairly common strategy in this financial projection for me. But this is assuming that this year and last year are kind of our new normal years. It's very difficult to say, hey, let's look at the last 3 years, because the last 3 years were not normal. So this is kind of a nice in the middle. It could certainly be higher than this, but this is a pretty safe expectation for what we would expect from our local revenue. So you can see the revenue percent change there is pretty minuscule. When your revenue increases in very small percentages and your expenditures don't, we know that that creates a problem. So expenditures, salary and wages, and benefits, those two numbers together are 80% of the budget. And so you can see how that forecasts with approximately 3% per group. Benefits includes the health insurance contribution, and then all other is the non-salary. So to give you a couple of examples of the things that we've experienced just in the last 6 months related to the budget, our property insurance renewal was to go up $50,000. So this is on average $180,000, $200,000 a year. And our renewal came back $50,000 increase, not because our rates increased, but because the value of our replacement cost. So if we really had a building that had a catastrophic fire and we had to replace it, the building value replacement cost increased so significantly that it increased our bill $50,000. And so we actually, we work with Kevin Rogers at Northfield Insurance Agency, and he actually recommended increasing our deductible from $5,000 to $25,000. That ended up saving about $28,000 a year. So we are only increasing about $25,000, $23,000. But that is completely out of our control and very much related to the market conditions that we're experiencing. Our work comp is projected to have about a $50,000 increase based on the experience that we've had in the last couple of years. So those are just two examples. I could probably keep going with different ways inflation has impacted the budget. But that just gives you a sense of kind of our day-to-day experience that we're seeing in the budget. So expenditure-wise, you'll see from 23 to 24, the total expenditures go down. And you would expect that because we did go through a priority-based budget process in last spring that cut roughly $4.5 million over 2 years. So 24 is the second year of that. And so you're seeing those final pieces come off that were extended for 1 year. In addition, most of the federal funds are also coming off. And so anything that was one-time funded is falling off of that as well. So there's a reduction in expenditures for 24. However, there's still a spending variance. So we're still planning a deficit budget or forecasting a deficit budget at this point for fiscal 24. Coincidentally or not, the $1 million was my estimate of the change for the health insurance. And so we know that that's part of it. But the other part of it is truly just the inflationary impacts that we're seeing across the board in a variety of areas. And so obviously deficit budgets are not sustainable. And this shows you the fund balance I would focus very much just on the yellow highlighted. So the unassigned fund balance in dollar amount is the first yellow line, and our ending fund balance. So we ended last year with 14.19%, which was lower than anticipated, which means we are starting our fiscal 23 budget with less fund balance than I had originally projected. So we are projecting to end about 12.98% at the end of this year, and then 10.3. And as you can see, it goes pretty quick after that. And then the bottom yellow is if we were to adjust the budget just to meet 14%, that is the dollar amount that we would have to either increase revenue or decrease expenditures by. So my recommendation at this point is to look at another 2.5 million that will bump us out past 24, allow us to get through what the legislature is going to do with their $17 billion. And hopefully this will look better in the future. But that will give us a pretty solid, even if the legislature does come through with some additional funding, we have a deficit budget right now, and increasing staff wages and benefits to make sure we're providing competitive wages and able to keep the staff that we do have, because we know staffing shortages are also a struggle. I don't anticipate the state would come through in a way that would not, that would resolve any budget reduction, if that makes sense. In terms of the 23-24 budget, what we are currently planning for is the operating capital and LTFM budget on February 13th, debt service and the internal service fund on March 13th, child nutrition and community services on April 24th, and the general fund on May 8th. And then all of those budgets get compiled into my annual budget book, and that would be approved on May 22nd. I intentionally spread this out just a little bit more than I have historically, just so we have additional time to work through a budget reduction process. My current recommendation is that our leadership team is going to review the budget tomorrow and the forecast tomorrow, and make an additional or a list of recommendations, ideas, and then we will bring that to probably several public opportunities for input to make sure that we have enough feedback about the recommendations, and then that will come back to the board. So that was a lot of information, but I will take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Val. Excellent work. We appreciate you. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? Robert?
Well, thank you, Val. It's certainly stark, but important that we're getting ahead of this. With the current, you mentioned that currently our special education is covered at, we're seeing reimbursements at 55%. Could you speak broadly of what amount that 45% is currently costing the district in our cross subsidy?
Just a little over $5 million annually. Yep.
And if I can just follow up on that, I think it's important to note that most of that 45 or 55% is coming from the state. And it's important to remember that in the 1970s, when the federal government passed PL 94-142, which started special education, they promised that as a federal government, they would cover 40% of school district costs for special education. The feds have never gotten above 22%, if I'm remembering right, is their highest amount that they've ever reimbursed. So that 45%, the number Val gave, is a little bit deceiving because the state has had to step in and pick up more of that. And so that's why this is a state issue. It really should be a federal issue, but we have a better opportunity to get the funding from our state government than we do our federal government. So we have just talked about that 40% number, never getting to 22% a few times. And it is the difference between what the feds promised that they would do, what they've actually delivered on, and how the state has had to fill in or not fill in, depending on your perspective.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Jeff?
On the enrollment you had from like 400 students or something, we've always been around 4,000 for a long, long time. So we're dipping down, and it looked like, was there like 400, like 4 years ago or so? And then you said that one year in there that you would expect to be more stable and then go down. So why are you saying that?
So if, I'm just gonna go back to that slide so I don't misspeak. So based on the birth rate and some of the enrollment that we saw come in this year that was a little higher than expected in certain grade levels, that's forecasting for next year to be basically from 3,805, it's like an extra 10 kids. So not a massive increase, but certainly not declining, which is a positive way to be. And that's really based off birth rate and the way the enrollment trends have gone. And then you'll see like on kindergarten for 24-25, it drops from 245 to 231. So then we're going back the other way. That is off the top of my head, kind of the big reason for that is really kind of the kindergarten estimate was a little more, and our kindergarten enrollment for this past year was slightly more than I had anticipated. Does that answer your question?
Good, thank you. Anyone else? Corey?
Thanks for the report, Val.
Yeah.
Question on your second page of financial projections where you have the plan change needed.
Yep.
That bottom line, is that cumulative over the years, or are those the individual decreases or individual numbers per year?
It's cumulative.
Okay, I thought so. I just
Yep.
want to clarify. Thank you.
Okay, Ben?
Thanks, Val, and thanks for the graphs.
Yeah.
That helps me anyways, visually sort of see where we're headed.
Absolutely.
When we look at kind of what the governor's current proposal is, do we have a sense of, I mean, you said we'd still be in kind of deficit budget, but roughly what would that look like if I think the governor's looking at 2%, 4%, and then 50% closing the special education cross subsidy, but what, I mean, just in broad strokes, do you have a sense of what that looks like?
So every 1% that the state gives us on the basic per pupil formula is roughly 280,000, I think. Yeah, 288,000. So 4%, obviously, I'm just going to use 300 because round numbers are a lot better for me. So 1.2 million in terms of funding. If they fund 50% of the cross subsidy, that's in theory, 2.5 million. I would say the state calculates cross subsidy slightly differently than I do, because I'm including every dollar that's in and out, and they exclude some of the gen ed aid, and it's more complicated than I will go into tonight for you, but that would in theory be 2.5 million. And so we're looking at, 3.5 to 4 million in that range, 3 to 4 million. I like to be conservative. Again, that's super dependent on what comes through and what passes, and $3 million would absolutely put us in a better position. But if you're looking 2 years out at a $5.8 million deficit, I want to put us in a place where we're not at 14 every year, right? That was our original goal with our process last year that just didn't materialize because who could have projected this type of inflation as well as some of the other things that happened. But I'd much rather put the district in a solid place where we could choose to add back, should we be in that position, rather than next year coming back and saying, oh, it wasn't quite enough. Or we should have done it, and we didn't. So that's kind of my current thought process. But we will gladly accept anything that the state is willing to give us. Yeah.
If I can
Thank you.
follow up on that too. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the governor's proposal and my report a little bit later, but I think it's important to just really emphasize what Val has been talking about when it comes to declining enrollment. So we are really thrilled with the numbers that we're hearing coming out of St. Paul, right? And especially the big one to us is the tying the formula to inflation. That will give us much more predictability. We just aren't able to predict anything beyond 2 years out, because if your biggest funder is an unknown, you responsibly cannot put that in your budget, right? We are always conservative on that to make sure that we can get through. If there is something different and we don't get what we had projected, that has a significant damaging factor to our budget. So tying the formula to inflation would be huge, because we would then, it would become a known as opposed to an unknown. But the declining enrollment part, even with all of those increases, it would help, but it would also provide us an opportunity for what we are hoping for, a soft landing to whatever the new normal is that we will have for the number of students in our district. So this is going to be an important messaging issue for the board, that if we are going to see some, finally, some reasonable increases in St. Paul for us, when we're still going with a declining enrollment piece, we're going to still have to make some adjustments, because we have to look at the long term. And that's our goal, is to be able to use whatever we get for in this legislative session as a long-term piece to make what we are offering sustainable. So in the short term, there, as Val has said, we just have to emphasize, there's very likely going to continue to be some adjustments. And by that, we mean reductions. But an increase from St. Paul will really soften how we have to implement those. So both things can be true. And we're going to have to really try to explain to people how impactful declining enrollment is, even if you finally get some kind of reasonable increase from the state, which it's been a long time since we really have gotten that. So.
Yep. And can I just add to that? The other, one of the other reasons that I choose to be conservative in that estimate from the state is because while those numbers sound good, it would not be the first time that they added language that cost the district something without funding it. So there's two sides to that process. And so if they put in policy that requires us to do something, that add another staff here or there, or whatever the case might be, that offsets any revenue increase that they're providing. And so that's another reason that we choose to be a little more conservative in the model.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Jenny?
Thank you, Val.
Yeah.
I'm just really curious, and I could probably take a deep dive and maybe figure this number out myself, but I just wanted to ask just a rough estimate in your mind, how much enrollment would have to increase to pull us out of that deficit, just so that we'd be on have a safe number?
I would say probably 150 students or more. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hey, thank you so much, Val.
Jeff had one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Jeff.
I was just wondering on the enrollment piece. I mean, I can look and see where some school districts, I think, in areas have really grown. And then others are kind of more diminished. Sorry. I'll go first. Jeez, sorry about that. So can you see parts of the state that are kind of growing with enrollment and parts that aren't? I mean, and I know we're kind of more rural, and I know what the numbers are for what we've had in growth for Rice County versus other suburban areas, but you know, that's got it, because I know that some suburban schools are growing, and then, you know, we're projected to kind of go down, but what, you know, maybe in inner city stuff is, inner city stuff is, you know, maybe declining, but you know what I mean? Kind of, do you see trends with that? And then kind of like maybe what we could do to copy somebody that's growing?
So I would say from anecdotal analysis, nothing formal or official, the conversations I've had with my other rural colleagues is that most districts are experiencing some sort of declining enrollment, or at least not growing enrollment. When Hazel Reinhardt presented here, the birth rate across the state is declining. So it is not a Northfield specific issue, but it is obviously impacting us. The metro just has completely different dynamic in terms of growth and student access to new students than we do, because you can literally drive across the street and be in a different district. The proximity is just very different than here. We are 178 square mile district. So we could certainly draw open enrollment, advertise it, but that's not like a 5-minute jaunt to the neighborhood school district, right? And so I think that makes it a different challenge for this district to be innovative, or like we are just geographically in a different position than the metro districts, excuse me. So I don't know that fully answered your question, but that's my rough analysis.
No, thanks for that. My apologies for my phone. It's brand new and I haven't mastered it at all yet. So
No problem.
If I could follow up on that briefly
Sure.
too. So I think that what we have clearly heard from our demographic studies is two things: lower birth rate and not enough housing. So when you say copy other places where they see the growth, I think they also tend to be a part where there is a boom in the housing market, or an increase in the housing market. So those are the two issues that we face. So if we increased the number of homes, which we know there are a few developments happening within the community, the issue is that the number of students that each of those homes generates on average, Hazel Reinhardt, our demographer, she has given us a number of, so we will get those numbers, but for example, an apartment generates 0.11 students. Now, of course, no one has 0.11 students, but when you look at that across the board, so when you see an apartment complex going up, that's a good thing, because the hope would be, the concept is that people who have outlived their single family home, maybe their children are gone, they might move from a single family home into something smaller, downsizing, which would open up more single family housing inventory. When we did our demographic study in 2014, Hazel said that we were averaging right around 2 students per single family dwelling. The last time that was around 1 or less.
0.6.
0.6. So just in about 6 years or so, we went from a single family dwelling on average, providing the school district with 2 students, to less than 1. So I think that that's a good example of how the combination of housing and lower birth rate make that difficult. So to copy what others have done, I think opening up housing is the first piece. And I think that that is something that our community has some control over.
Thank you. Anyone else, comments or questions? Thank you, Val.
Thanks.
Okay, we're on to item B, and that is my summary for the mid-year evaluation of Dr. Hillman. The full summary is in the packet. I'm going to read just some of it. So for this review period, 6 out of 7 board members completed the mid-year performance appraisal. The evaluation covers all facets of the superintendent's job responsibilities. And we gave a numerical rating of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest, for 48 responsibilities organized around 8 major topics and 5 goals. In addition to completing the numerical ratings, board members were encouraged to leave comments. And then I sat with Dr. Hillman and shared the report with him. At this mid-year evaluation, goals are still in progress, and Dr. Hillman received an excellent appraisal achievement, an overall rating of 4.7 out of 5. I want to highlight a couple of areas. One is the category of instructional leadership. Besides continuing excellent programs such as Bridges to Kindergarten, Dr. Hillman and his staff secured a highly competitive multi-tiered system of support grant from the Minnesota Department of Education, and that was awarded to only 1 of 12 districts. That's excellent achievement. And then in the category of staff relations, one of the largest investments Dr. Hillman has made into his staff's professional development, which falls under that category, staff relations, was securing funding so that they could participate in letters training, that is the language essentials for teachers, teachers of reading and spelling. And so during taking this training during contract hours. In late September, Northfield Public Schools contracted the Morris Leatherman Company to perform a scientific random sample survey of the district's registered voters to understand the capacity for updating the high school. And that result came back with 83% of the 400 participants giving the district an A or B letter grade. And then 66% of the participants gave the district's financial management an A or B letter grade. Again, thanks to the networking and involvement Dr. Hellman has in our community. And then additionally, during this evaluation period, Dr. Hellman successfully managed the district's campaign to successfully pass 2 capital project levy referendum questions on November 8th. And then, of course, we're all celebrating his being appointed as being selected as the Superintendent of the Year for 2023 by the Minnesota Association of School Administrators, and is currently one of the 4 finalists for the national title. In closing, Dr. Hellman has the full support and confidence of the entire board. His staff and community stakeholders speak highly of him. The relationships he has cultivated over the years in the community continue to yield for him and the district strong relationships and resources to keep our district special. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now to item C, which is Dr. Hellman's operations and strategic plan update.
Yes, and I thank you for your great feedback and your kind comments. And it is, as I say often, it is a blessing to do this job that I genuinely love in a place where I genuinely love doing it. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. So today's update, I just have a couple of items. The first is I wanted to report to you, as you know, we are committed to continuous improvement. And so we are not afraid to try new things, measure how it's going, and then adjust as needed. And so coming out of the pandemic, one of the things that we learned and endeavored to do differently was how we engage families, trying to take it from a couple of times of years through what I think a lot of people would consider to be maybe an antiquated model of only talking to folks just twice a year during what the traditional parent-teacher conferences were, and trying to create an ongoing process of conversation that includes a mix of ongoing regular feedback through our digital distribution channels, face-to-face communication, Zoom connections, phone calls as necessary, and try to think about how we create this ongoing conversation in a variety of modalities. And so we try to measure. And so we asked 2 questions of our families about that we had measured in our previous family engagement or parent satisfaction surveys. And these are 2 areas that we had seen the opportunity for greatest growth, which prompted us to try to thinking about something different, doing something different when it comes to family engagement. So the 2 questions that we tested in the Pulse survey were, I received positive communication about my child from the school. And the other question was, I regularly receive feedback from school staff on how well my child is learning. And so what we gave you here were in the percentages there, those are the top 2%, the people who agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. And so when we look at that, I received positive communication about my child from the school. You'll notice that our elementaries and the NCEC, so our early childhood and our elementaries, those responses are, around 3/4 of families giving us that agree or strongly agree. And as typical, when we see surveys around family connection, the older the student gets, the less people seem that they are getting that kind of feedback. Regardless of the efforts that we have tried to this point, we always see that kind of trend. One of the reasons that we want to try to change things up. So you'll see that 61% of middle school respondents to our survey indicated that they agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. I received positive communication about my child from the school, and 41% at the high school. Now, when we look at regularly receiving feedback from school staff on how well my child is learning, we see a similar pattern with our youngest learners having the highest amount of satisfaction with that statement at the NCEC. I think one of the things that's important there is that many of the families there are those preschool classes and the childcare center are very small cohorts. So routinely you're seeing young families in that area are seeing a lot of different digital pieces of feedback almost on a daily basis. So it's just obviously much more manageable. And as we progress toward the high school, where those folks typically have some of the largest number of students on in their courses, we see it dropping to around 38%. So this is our pulse survey where we're at. We are not satisfied with it. We are grateful for the feedback that families provided us. We read every single comment, right? We made sure that we went through and there's a variety of different perspectives. We do have a group of folks who are very clearly telling us that they would prefer to have the way that we had done it before. Part of that could be messaging, because everybody should have had an opportunity for face-to-face conferences should they want it. I'm going to give you an example of why someone might not need a face-to-face conference. Our elementary families, we have some elementary students who, for a variety of reasons, their teacher might communicate with that family 3 or 4 days a week. So sometimes those families say, you know what, we talk almost every day. I don't feel like I need to come in for that conference at this point. There are other folks who feel they don't necessarily need to hear in the interim, but they really would like that couple of times a year. So the idea is to try to meet the needs of all of our families through a set of flexible approaches. There is some feedback about the community feel that those parent-teacher conference nights had provided when everyone or a lot of people are coming together at the school. So that feeling is something that we really think we are able to leverage through programming like the wonderful community school programming that we have at each of our sites. But we're still working through all of the feedback. We're going to take this back to the work team that helped us develop this. We're going to add some parent stakeholders to our work team as we review the feedback. And I've given you a link to the full dashboard. I do want to share with you, we have a lot of people really doing great work in this area. So one of the questions that we ask in all of our surveys is what we call the shout out question, right? Who is doing something well in the area that we are surveying you about? So in this case, the question was around, is there a school staff member you would like to recognize for doing exceptional work with communication? And can you give us some specific reasons why? And I'm selfish, so I send all of those emails to staff who got a shout out, and I sent 150 of them. It was pretty amazing. And 60% of those folks received more than one shout out. So when we think about having about 330 or 340 teachers in the district, you have a whole bunch of people who are doing exceptional work to the point that families were recognizing them. So we want to look at the numbers. We want to look at people's individual commentary, because even if only one person has a comment, if that is about a particular topic, sometimes it provides a light to say, oh, this is something we hadn't considered. We look at what is being successful, and then we try to replicate that. So the 611 survey submissions were a little bit lower than what I had hoped for. We usually get around 1,000. We did our normal thing of sending out, multiple reminders, and it was in both district newsletters and building newsletters. So 611 is a little bit lower than what we normally get, but it's still substantial enough for us to find some themes. So I just think it's important when we survey that we share the feedback with folks, which we have already done with families. We shared that in the last district family update, and then want to share it with you publicly here. So that is the Pulse survey. I'm going to briefly touch on the governor's education proposal that was highlighted last week, kind of partially highlighted, because what we understand is the governor is releasing the highlights of his budget over a series of days. If you follow this, you've seen that there's been some announcements about different policy areas over the last several days. And our understanding is that the full budget is going to be presented tomorrow, actually on January 24th. So we look forward to seeing some more details. What was presented last week around the education budget was a basic formula increase of 4% in 2023-24 and 2% in 2024-25. It does also include linking the formula with inflation beginning in 2026. The 50% reduction in school district special education cross subsidies that we mentioned. We are awaiting the details, as Val said, because it's one thing to say 50%, but we've learned over the years that we want to ask for more detail, because what is often said at a microphone at a state press conference sometimes is slightly different when you actually get it in the details of the plan. I think another piece that was really important was recognizing the important work that our teachers are doing with English learners. So students whose home language is something other than English and who are doing the hard work to adapt and learn English, that costs money. And we do have a gap there as well. There's a cross subsidy for English learners. And so in this case, the state it isn't nearly as pronounced as the special education cross subsidy, but is still substantial nonetheless. And so a 25% increase in funding for English learners. There's a number of other things, including the potential for universal free meals for all students. And of course, in Minnesota, we have had free meals for some time since Governor Dayton for students who've qualified for both free and or reduced lunch. So even if I only qualified for reduced lunch through the federal program, in Minnesota, my lunch was also free there as well. So this would take it from that to where everyone would be funded free universal meals. There's a number of other things. There's some early childhood proposals, some other, but we just have not seen all of the details on that. So I'll come with you for another report at the next meeting. It is important to note, we are still going to push for a higher level on our two priorities, which are the formula. And we are strongly advocating and will continue to strongly advocate for 5% increase to the formula in each year of the biennium. Just to give you an example of the difference between it's at 4%, we get 1.15 million. At 5%, that's 1.44 million. So that's a fairly substantial difference when you take that into consideration with what Val shared during the financial forecast tonight. Linking the formula to inflation and then simply fully funding. When I say fully funding, I mean pay every single penny of the special education cross subsidy for every district. Those are the two things that I will continue to really focus on. Those are the highest priorities that I see that would be important for our school district. So those are the things that we are going to continue to really emphasize because they would dramatically change our financial outlook and would be very helpful. So we just need to make sure that you are continuing to pay attention. This is a once in a generation legislative session. And so we really need to be engaged. It's not a spectator sport. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We have to be engaged. We have to be involved. I did give you a link in the report to the additional details, so the full release from the governor so that you can look at it yourself. But to spare you time, I will stop there on that issue because you all know I could suck the air out of the room for several hours on this topic. So we'll move on. I want to share with you, we did complete our Career Technical Advisory Task Force last week. We have this approach when we are facing a challenge or something that we need to get some additional feedback on around an advisory task force. It differs from the standing advisory committees that the board has. It's around a specific topic. We've learned that we can get people to come to 3 meetings. And so we focus on 3 meetings. We focus on a product that team will finish at the end. So what you'll see is that we're connecting it to our vision because career technical education elective offerings are really essential to making sure that every student is prepared for lifelong success. We also know that we have a limited amount of budget to be able to fund these electives. And so not all of our current offerings meet student needs. So we want to figure out what are the things that we're doing that are meeting the needs? What are the things that we need to do to change and adapt and things we should start doing to help meeting the students' needs? And then the hard questions about what do we need to stop doing? How do we fund these other things by stopping doing certain things? So we did have more than 20 people who participated. I've shared with you before the folks who participated. You can read the different groups that were represented in the report. First meeting, we did a community mapping exercise because when it comes to career technical education, it isn't just the school. There are a number of opportunities within the community where students can also learn some of these skills. So if we look at the entire community through our collective impact model, how can students gain these skills? Sometimes it's not within the school, but making sure everyone is aware of all of the different ways that they can gain those skills is important. So that's what we did at the first meeting. The second meeting, we talked about skills. We thought this was important for all the partners in the room to hear what are the kinds of skills that employers are looking for. And so they did this was the most robust discussion of all 3 nights. And what was really interesting was for people to hear the commonalities of what different employers needed, many of which of skills are achieved in our core classes, right? So that our traditional 4 core classes do have that impact on career technical education. And I think it was really eye-opening for community members in these specific fields to hear the specific skills that others were looking for. So it was the most, we had to get people to stop talking because there was so much discussion around it. And really trying to come together on what were they meaning when they were talking about a specific skill. So one group might have brought up one skill, another group had something very similar, but when you talked about them together, what they were meaning, they were different enough to where they aren't the same thing, or in some cases, things that sounded vastly different were actually the same skill that they were looking for. So for our community stakeholders to have that opportunity to dialogue about that was, I think, really important for folks. And then at the last meeting, we did a tour of our facilities, and we did this keep, stop, start doing exercise that focuses on the courses that we offer and the various events that we provide. And then we did a power voting exercise. People got 5 votes for each of the areas that were highlighted. And I've included those. I did have to update it. The original version had the start doing in there twice. I think that we've got that all squared away now. So you can see how members voted on that. We are currently taking this report. We are looking at what are both the short-term and long-term steps that we can take to implement the feedback from this group. Are there some things that we can do with our coursework for next year already? And then what are the other pieces or partnerships we need to do over the next several years to really modernize our career technical education program? This is really important because we heard a lot about this during the budget prioritization process last year. So we just want the community to know that when they give us feedback, we take that seriously. We step into action, we bring people together, we ideate, and then we create a plan and act on it. So I just wanted to report to you in the community about that particular task force. With that, that is my report for this evening. I'd be happy to stand for any questions that people might have about any of those 3 topics.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Board members, do you have any questions or comments? No? I wanted to hear about teachers for the different technical classes. I know there was a discussion about certain licenses and
Yeah, great question. So this is a challenge that we face in the career technical education areas. Well, we know there's a teacher shortage across all disciplines across the state and the nation. In Minnesota, we do have a tiered licensing system that does allow for folks who have specific credentials or specific experience in a technical area to potentially become a teacher. We have one of those examples this year. We had a 1-year leave of absence in a family consumer science position. We know there were well more than 50 openings across the state. Think about that, 332 school districts and 50 family consumer science openings. There's not that many family consumer science teachers coming out of college brand new. And we had a 1-year opening. So our high school kitchen manager, CC Green, has a chef certificate. That's the kind of technical certification that is allowed to get you the licensure. We spoke with her. She stepped in and is doing an excellent job for us this year in this capacity. That's an example of the shortage. We have some areas like technology education. You would think of that typically, it used to be called industrial tech. Many people would think of it as shop class. There isn't even a college in Minnesota right now that even offers the teaching licensure. If you want to get Minnesota licensure for technology education, there are 2 schools in Wisconsin that you can go to get a Minnesota license. There's one Minnesota college that I do understand will put together a specialized individual program. But, you know, when these are skills that employers are begging for, but we don't have the people to be able to step into the classroom to teach it, I think people see the challenge that we're up against. And frankly, if we think about some of the technical trades, we cannot compete with the salary and benefits that private industry pays, especially when the economy is in boom, which it has been, you know, for the last several years. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing. So we're thinking through, how does that affect our offerings? Are there ways that we can do other kind of work release programs, if you will, so students can get those skills, but in the workplace as opposed to on campus? And I think that that's the very exciting part of this. I think we're going to see some real innovation in how students learn these skills. And it might not be the exact same way that people would have experienced it over the last 30 or so years.
Good. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Jeff?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, 332, 33 public schools in Minnesota. You know, it sounds to me like we're not promoting the trades at all, in a sense. I mean, who are you gonna call if we're not training kids to, you know, be plumbers, to be carpenters, to be mechanics? I mean, who are you gonna call? So that to me seems to be a big gap. Is there anything that you see with other states? I mean, can we compare to look to other states to see what they're doing that are some productive models?
So I think that this issue is a problem across many states. It just isn't Minnesota. So it is a national issue. I think there are pockets of innovation that tend to be more, I would say, more in that school to work model is how I would characterize it, where there are partnerships with employers where students go. It's not exactly an apprenticeship kind of thing, but you could think of it in that vein. It doesn't mean the technical term of what we would all think is an apprenticeship, but it's got that flavor. I think that is one of the ways that some people have solved it. I think every state that I have understood is facing the same challenge. Now, there are some districts that are able to scale it better than others. So if I'm a smaller district and I have the right person who is really skilled at teaching and willing to do this, that's where you're seeing some really great work. So I think the key part is, how do we really realize preparing every student for lifelong success? And I've said this many times, we can't pigeonhole people into one thing or another, right? So kids should be ready to do whatever they want after high school. And then it's our job to help them gain the skills for what they want to do. They should be ready, and then they should be able to achieve what they want. And I think we have to also start breaking down some of the stereotypes. So what is wrong with a person who is a skilled electrician who also plays the violin, right? What is wrong, with the person who is a concert pianist who also is able to rewire their house on the weekend, right? Sometimes I think we pigeonhole these skills, and I think we all have a responsibility to say, no, if you enjoy it, there's a lot of different ways to be successful, not just one way. And I think breaking that stereotype down both ways is important, Jeff.
Well, I think part of that too is, people have to have the ambition to do that. And I think that, IT was not even a thing necessarily. Well, it was, but I mean, I think that if you're talented and you can see that there's good money to pick up and a lot of jobs, you may be more, motivated to get into an IT type of thing than something vocational. And I don't know what the numbers are in that, but I think that that's a factor.
I would agree with you, Jeff. I think you raise a great point. The choice is, just think about the sheer number of jobs that kids coming out of high school have the option for. So when this year's seniors, some of them in the audience, were kindergartners, there probably was no such field as a YouTuber, right? Influencer, social media influencer. Today, those can be very lucrative careers, and our kids who are in middle school and high school, that's something that they see themselves as. So I agree with you. I think the total number of opportunities that you have to have work have changed. And I do think that I think we also have to recenter what our definition of vocational work is, right? Because I think that cuts across all sorts of trades. When we talk the trades, I think we typically think about the ones that we have always thought about. But the person who can fix a school computer router, right? That's a technical trade. It's different than it was, 20 years ago. The people who fix fiber optic cable when people break it, that's a skilled trade, right? That's fairly new in the last, 30 years or so, where that has really become something that is really needed. So I think we also need to expand what is our definition of career technical education.
Thank you. Great questions. Any other questions or comments? Jenny?
Thank you, Matt. I have another question about the Career Technical Education Task Force. Is this the first year that you had such a task force assembled?
Yes. So this task force, I'm going to recommend become an ongoing district committee.
I was just going to ask then. So then do you see that repeating year after year?
I do. So it'll be a little different, right? A task force we put together on one challenge. An advisory committee, we ask people to give us ongoing feedback. And I do think it's appropriate for us to transition the task force to ongoing feedback, because I think one of the challenges that schools have had is that when the marketplace changes, we haven't always changed as rapidly as we should have. So if we have a regular ongoing method of hearing from our community and our community's employers about what are the skills and jobs that they need, we can then adjust earlier, because we have a perception of what is needed. but we really don't know. We need to hear from the employers. So I am going to be recommending that this become a standing school district advisory committee. And I've asked the members of the task force in a follow-up survey last night for those people who would be willing to continue on. And so just like all of our other task forces, we'd ask to appoint at least one board member. Will involve our district youth council and have them be part of it, as well as these folks who have engaged with us to this point. So having it an ongoing advisory committee, which would meet 3 times a year, is the way that we're looking to move forward.
And then what did you do in previous years surrounding CTE to develop courses?
So yeah, to develop courses, we really worked through some consortiums that we have. So we're part of a couple of different consortiums. One is through Dakota County, but really we have used the traditional items, right? So we've delivered these things with, I would say, some modest innovation at various points. So things like adding the robotics team, right, is something that was added, and that came through our staff going to some of these other consortiums and learning about those kinds of things. But it was really staff driven as opposed to community driven. So I think that will be just a little bit of difference between what we had done before and what we do moving forward.
Are you still going to maintain then that type of staff training regarding CTE?
So those staff members will typically seek training based on if there's any updates to their particular area. So I do think that the new advisory committee will spawn some additional training based upon what is next for us. So if we choose to add a different discipline, for example, obviously someone will need to be hired, either someone existing will need to be trained or hire someone to be able to deliver that. And part of that is, of course, we have to have both a licensure or that alternate licensure, if you will, and then making sure that we have the ability and the resources to be able to help support that training as we move ahead. So those are the 2 things I would say would be necessary as we move forward. I think the CTE advisory committee is going to be instrumental in helping us hear what the community wants, and then we match the staff to what those needs are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much.
You bet.
All right, item 6 is our consent agenda. If there's anything anyone would like to pull, as a reminder, there were some personnel items in the table file added to the consent grouping. If there's anything anyone would like to pull from the consent grouping for separate consideration, let me know. Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent grouping? Okay, moved by Jenny, second. Robert, thank you. All those in favor of approving the consent grouping, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 7 is our items for individual action. And we have 3 items. The first is the dissolution of girls hockey cooperative sponsorship. The board is asked to approve the dissolution of the girls hockey cooperative sponsorship with Randolph Independent School District 195, beginning with the school year 2023-2024. The governing boards of each participating school must jointly make an application for dissolution of cooperative sponsorship to the Minnesota State High School League. Due to no participants from Randolph Independent School District 195 currently participating in this program, we are being asked to approve a dissolution. Is there a motion to approve the dissolution of the girls hockey cooperative sponsorship as presented? Okay, moved by
Second.
Corey, second by Jeff. Dr. Hellman, would you like to make any comments?
No, I think that we have shared this at the last meeting, and so again, just no participants from District 195 and moving forward with dissolving the cooperative.
Okay, are there any comments, any points of discussion from the board members?
So what's the obvious, if there's nobody in there, nobody, you'd have to have at least one person. So if you had one, is it, would we still be doing that or suggest to keep it if we had one?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff, that I can't answer right now. I do think that as we move forward, we are going to be looking into providing some guidelines for how we adopt a cooperative sponsorship. Whenever we secure a cooperative sponsorship with another school district, we have to count at least some of their enrollment toward our competitive section placement. And so while we are always wanting to make sure we provide opportunities for kids, our main role is to provide opportunities for kids who live within the Northfield school district or attend the Northfield schools. So I do think that that is something that as we tackle this in the coming year, what are the number of students from another school that we would need in order to have an effective cooperative sponsorship? Right now, we don't have to answer that question because there's nobody involved.
Okay, anyone else? Questions or comments? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. The next item is our policy committee recommendation. The board is requested to approve the policy committee's recommended updates to policy 801. Is there a motion to approve the policy committee's recommended updates to policy 801 as presented? Moved by Robert, second. Have a second. Thanks, Ben. Dr. Hammond, do you have any comments on it?
I really shared the comments at the last meeting.
Okay. Are there any questions or points of discussion from the board members? No? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Item C is our board committee assignments. The board is requested to approve board member committee appointments and representation to various organizations and school liaisons for calendar year 2023 as presented at the January 9, 2023 organizational board meeting. Is there a motion to approve board member committee appointments and representation to various organizations and school liaisons for calendar year 23 as presented? Moved by Corey, second. Second by Ben, thank you. I would like to say that board members give their time and energy to various district and community boards, and thank you to each of you for attending all of these different meetings. We look forward to your committee reports this year. Dr. Hammond, would you like to make any comments?
No, I think that the advice, well, yes, no, and then I'll make a comment. So I better, I really appreciate the way that our district advisory committees work. If you're new to them, you're going to see it's a good mix of stakeholders in the various committees. And we have our wonderful representatives from the district youth council who really help frame those discussions. It is really how we get a lot of the input and feedback that makes it to this table, right, through their service and people's feedback. So thank you for being there to listen to it directly.
Great. Any comments, discussion, questions? Okay, so we do have a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Item 8. Items for information. I have 2 for you tonight, and that is our board workshop will be held Saturday, February 4th from 9 to 12 in the district office boardroom. And then we have the week of January 23rd through 29th. This week is paraprofessional recognition week, and I have just a small description here for you. Governor Tim Walz has proclaimed the week of January 23rd through the 29th as Paraprofessional Recognition Week. Northfield Public Schools appreciates our educational assistants and the support and services they provide to enhance student achievement. Educational assistants have stepped up in many ways over the past few years, supporting school age care, assisting with virtual learning, helping deliver meals for students, and much, much more. We're grateful for their commitment to meeting the needs of all of our students. Okay, that is all of the business that we have. Our future meetings are Saturday, September 4th, 9 to noon, as mentioned before, a board workshop. Monday, February 13th, 6 p.m. is a regular board meeting, also here in the district office boardroom. And Monday, February 27th, 6 p.m., another regular board meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Robert, second by Jeff. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.